It all started on a Friday night. I had never been a fan of the supernatural. Growing up in the suburbs of Illinois, I never thought I'd have any real experiences with the paranormal. But when my friends and I, a group of 4, Jack, Emily, Sarah, and I, decided to spend the weekend in an old, abandoned house, things changed. The house was an odd choice, honestly. It had been vacant for years, but Jack had insisted we stay there. He always liked the idea of doing something different to make his weekends more interesting. Emily and Sarah were on board right away. I wasn't so sure. The house was large, creaky, and had an unnerving stillness to it. But what unsettled me the most was when we found an old Ouija board tucked away in the back of a dusty closet. Its edges frayed, the letters almost faded beyond recognition. "This will be fun," Jack said with a grin, already holding the board. "Let's see what we can summon." I didn't want to play. I felt an unease crawling up my spine the moment I saw it. But my friends weren't going to let me off the hook. We gathered around the table, with the candlelight flickering, shadows dancing on the walls. Jack placed his fingers on the planchette. Emily and Sarah eagerly followed suit. I sat back, arms crossed, trying to laugh it off, but a knot twisted in my stomach. "Is there anyone here with us?" Jack asked, his voice lighthearted, too casual. I expected nothing to happen. Of course, the planchette moved. At first, I thought it was a joke. I leaned in, staring at the planchette that slowly drifted across the board, but my friends swore they weren't touching it. It moved with purpose, stopping at a letter H. Then it slid over to E. L. L. O. "Hello," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. Her voice cracked, and I could hear the uncertainty in it. But it was too late, the thing wasn't done. The planchette moved again, faster this time, spelling out another word. "DRK." My heart skipped. Something wasn't right. A chill filled the air, and the candlelight flickered violently as if reacting to something unseen. The atmosphere grew heavy, suffocating. I felt a sharp, biting cold brush across my neck, and I could swear I heard a whisper, a low, guttural voice that wasn't anyone's. Jack's eyes widened as the planchette shifted once again. "I'm going to ask it more," he said, his voice trembling now. "Who are you?" The planchette moved again, jerking violently across the board. It didn't spell out any name, but what it spelled next made my stomach drop. "I am not alone." I stared at the words, too terrified to speak, too scared to move. The air grew thicker. The house seemed to groan as if in agony. I could hear faint footsteps from upstairs, slow and heavy, but no one had gone upstairs. I could feel the presence of something otherworldly, pressing in on us. "Jack?" I whispered, but my voice barely came out. "We need to stop this." But it was too late. The house was awake. I don't remember how long we sat there after the board spelled out its final message, but the feeling of unease lingered in the room, suffocating every one of us. The footsteps upstairs grew louder, heavier, but when I glanced at my friends, they were as frozen as I was, caught between disbelief and fear. Jack, now wide-eyed and pale, was the first to break the silence. "We need to say goodbye. We need to end this," he said in a trembling voice, but his fingers stayed glued to the planchette. It wasn't like he was holding it with purpose anymore. It was as though the board had a mind of its own. Sarah, the usually skeptical one, was shaking. "This isn't funny anymore. Let's get out of here. Now," she pleaded, her voice quivering. But it wasn't that easy. We couldn't stop. Every time we tried to move our hands away, the planchette jerked back as if it were being pulled by invisible strings, dragging us back toward the center of the board. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. The room grew unnaturally cold, so cold that I could see my breath fog in front of me, despite it being a warm night. The candle flickered and then went out entirely, plunging us into darkness. For a moment, there was only the sound of our breath and the crackling of the house settling, until bang. A loud thud came from the floor above us. We all jumped, hearts pounding in our chests. I stared at my friends. Jack was frozen, his mouth agape. Emily, once so eager to play, was now pale, her eyes wide with terror. Sarah grabbed my arm, whispering, "What was that? Please tell me you heard that." The footsteps, slow and deliberate, were back. They weren't normal footsteps. They sounded heavy, like someone dragging their feet, scraping against the floor. The noise grew louder, and soon, it was right above us. It was coming down the stairs. I had to move, had to get out. I tried to push the board away, but it was like the air around it had thickened, and my fingers couldn't break free. Then the room's temperature plummeted again, this time even colder, to the point where it stung. I felt it, the presence, closing in on me, brushing against my skin like ice, pressing in from every direction. My heart was racing, my breath shallow and frantic. "Goodbye," I whispered, my voice cracking. I wanted to say it louder, but the air in my lungs felt like lead. "Please, goodbye." But it didn't stop. The planchette didn't move, and the footsteps only grew louder, closer. I could hear them on the staircase now, right at the top, as though someone was standing just out of sight. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. And then, the voice. It was so close to my ear that I could feel the heat of it. But when I turned to look, there was no one there. It was a whisper that wasn't even human. It was guttural, distorted, and low, like something ancient, something wrong. "Get out." I felt my blood turn to ice, and without thinking, I slammed my hand down onto the board, yelling, "Goodbye!" as loud as I could, desperate to end whatever had started. The planchette shot across the board, crashing into the side with such force that it cracked the surface of the wood. The house groaned louder now, as if it were angry, as if the walls themselves were trying to swallow us whole. The footsteps, too, had stopped. There was nothing now but silence. A deep, suffocating silence that made the air feel thick and heavy. It was like the house was holding its breath. We didn't speak. We didn't move. We just stared at the board, hoping, praying, that it was finally over. But I knew one thing for sure. We hadn't just invited something into the house. We had unleashed something, and it wasn't finished with us yet. The silence was deafening. For a few long moments, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was our uneven breathing, each of us too scared to make a sound, afraid that the slightest movement might trigger whatever was lurking in the corners of that suffocating room. I glanced at my friends, but their faces were as pale as mine, eyes wide with terror. Emily looked like she was about to collapse, and Sarah, normally the strong one in any situation, was trembling uncontrollably, her hand clasped tight over her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. Then, the house groaned again, like a deep, guttural growl coming from within the walls. We all jumped, instinctively pulling away from the table. The candles, somehow extinguished by the unnatural cold, left us in pitch darkness. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Did we do something wrong? Jack's voice was barely a whisper, like he was afraid to speak too loudly, as though doing so might invite the horror closer. "I told you we shouldn't have messed with it," I snapped, unable to hide the fear in my voice. "That wasn't a joke, Jack. It wasn't funny." But we all knew deep down that it wasn't just about the Ouija board anymore. Something had been stirred, something that wanted more than just to communicate. Before anyone could reply, we heard the faint sound of footsteps again, except this time they weren't upstairs. They were right below us, in the hallway, like someone was pacing back and forth. Couldn't breathe. I tried to peer through the blackness, wishing for a hint of light, anything to see what was happening. But all I could hear was the slow, dragging steps, too heavy to be human. "What the hell?" Emily gasped, her voice breaking. "There's something in the house with us." "Shut up," Jack hissed, panic creeping into his tone. "You'll make it worse." But it was too late. The air had grown even colder, if that was possible, and the sense of something watching us was overwhelming. I felt its presence like a suffocating weight on my chest, an invisible force pressing in on me. The footsteps stopped suddenly, dead in their tracks. Then, in the deep silence, we heard something else, a scraping sound. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer, like nails dragging across the floor. And then, just like that, the door to the room swung open. I hadn't heard it creak or move, but it was open, just like that. The hallway beyond was dark, just like the room. But now I could hear breathing, slow, uneven, shallow breaths. Someone or something was standing in the doorway, its shape indistinct, like a shadow moving in and out of focus. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my eyes locked on the doorway. "Who's there?" Jack's voice cracked, breaking the silence. He sounded like he was trying to be brave, but it was clear he was terrified. There was no answer, just more scraping sounds, now moving toward us. The door creaked once more and then a loud bang. The force of it sent us all to the floor, and I gasped for air, my chest tight with panic. The house seemed to shake with the force of it, like it was being torn apart. We scrambled to our feet, but the shadow in the doorway was gone. In its place, there was only a lingering cold and the scent of something foul. We couldn't see it anymore, but we all felt it. "I think we need to leave. Now," Sarah whispered, her voice a strained whisper. She was shaking uncontrollably, her hands pale and trembling as she reached for the door. We all rushed toward the exit, but the moment we reached the door, it slammed shut. We were trapped. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. We were no longer alone. The door slammed shut with a deafening crack, locking us inside. Panic surged through me as I tried the handle, but it didn't budge. My fingers fumbled, desperate to find any way out. The walls of the room seemed to close in, the very air around me suffocating. "We need to break the door down," I gasped, my breath coming in ragged bursts. But my voice felt small in the oppressive darkness. But Jack, who had been leading our desperate attempt to escape, turned to face us with wide, horrified eyes. We can't just leave," he whispered. "We have to stop it. It won't let us go." His words sank into me like a stone. I had already felt the weight of the house pressing against me, the malevolent presence that was circling us, observing us. Something had been awakened when we touched that board, and it wasn't going to stop until it had us. I felt Sarah's hand on my arm, cold and trembling. She was staring at the walls, her eyes darting back and forth like she was searching for something, or perhaps someone. Her voice broke the silence, soft and uncertain. "Did anyone hear that? The scratching? It's back." I couldn't hear it at first, but then I did. The faint, slow scrape of something moving along the floorboards, just below the surface. It was coming from beneath the room, like claws dragging against wood. Dragging and dragging, getting closer and closer. A chill ran through my spine. "Get away from the door," I shouted suddenly, pulling Sarah back as I heard a faint creak beneath us. Emily froze, her eyes locked on the spot where the floor seemed to groan under the weight of something moving beneath us, coming closer. Then it happened. The floorboard beneath us cracked loudly, and in an instant, something black, like smoke but solid, shot up from the crack. I couldn't make out what it was. Its form was a roiling, twisted mass of shadow and darkness, like it didn't belong in the world at all. It rushed toward us with terrifying speed, a wretched noise, almost like a scream, twisting the air around us. I backed up, but there was nowhere to go. We were trapped, and this thing wasn't letting us escape. It wasn't even human. It didn't have a face, just a mass of darkness that seemed to consume everything it touched. I could feel it pressing against my chest, suffocating me with the stench of decay and rot. My lungs burned for air, and I felt my heart threatening to pound out of my chest. "Please," Jack cried out, his voice breaking. "What do you want from us?" And, for the first time since we'd started this nightmare, the thing responded. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the darkness, sending a shiver through my entire body. It wasn't a voice, it was something worse. A primal, ancient sound that resonated deep within the bones of the house. It felt like the sound of a predator, something much older than us, something that had waited for centuries to be freed. Then, in an instant, the thing was gone. The shadow disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, sinking back into the crack in the floor, vanishing without a trace. The silence that followed was deafening, but the oppressive, suffocating weight remained in the air, like it was still watching us. What the hell was that? Emily gasped, her eyes wide with terror, her hand clutching her chest. I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing: whatever had been unleashed wasn't done with us yet. The sound of scratching returned, louder this time, closer. It was almost as if the house was alive, shifting, groaning, responding to the dark presence that had taken residence within it. And that was when I saw it. A figure, standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dark hallway. I knew it wasn't human. The shape was wrong, too tall, too twisted. The air seemed to bend around it, as if it were distorting reality itself. It reached out toward us. I don't know how I managed to do it, but I grabbed the chair nearby and slammed it into the window. The glass shattered, the noise deafening, and cold night air rushed into the room. "Run!" I screamed. We didn't think twice. We bolted for the broken window, clawing our way through the jagged shards of glass, every nerve in our body screaming in fear. As soon as we were outside, we ran, not looking back. The dark house loomed behind us, silent once again, but I knew it was still there, waiting. I've never been back to that place. And Jack, Emily, Sarah, and we never spoke of it again. But every so often, I'll wake up in the dead of night, feeling something press against me, the same suffocating weight, the same cold breath against my skin. And I'll hear it again, those slow, dragging footsteps, coming from just behind me. The thing that followed us from the house. It's still out there. It always will be. It's been years since we escaped that house, and I still don't understand what happened that night. I've tried to move on, to push the memories back where they belong, but there are moments when the shadows stretch just a little too long, when the air grows just a little too cold, that I'm reminded. It started with the dreams. At first, they were subtle, just flashes, brief images. I'd wake up, heart racing, drenched in sweat, but I convinced myself it was nothing. After all, nightmares are just nightmares. But they didn't stop. They grew more vivid, more intense. In the dreams, I'm always back in that room. The same darkness, the same suffocating air. But now, the shadow isn't just in the corner. It's with me. I can feel its presence on my skin, its cold breath on my neck. It never speaks, but I feel its anger. It's like a weight pressing me down, suffocating me slowly, always one step away from touching me. I'm never alone in the dreams. Jack, Emily, and Sarah, they're all there too, but they're not the same. They're different, changed. Their eyes are empty, hollowed out, like they're no longer themselves. They walk beside me, but I know they're not really with me. They're something else. I hear their whispers, but they sound distant, like they're being carried by the wind. And the worst part? I know I can't wake up until I see it again. The thing that followed us. The thing that was waiting for us in the doorway. It hasn't left. I thought I was free, thought that once I was out of that house, I'd be okay. But the nightmares are only the beginning. They've started in the waking world now. It was Sarah who first noticed it. We had all kept our distance after that night, too terrified to even talk about what happened. But one day she called me. Her voice was strained, shaking as she spoke. I keep seeing it, in the corner of my vision. I swear it's following me. I didn't believe her at first, thought it was just the fear and trauma catching up with her. But I started noticing it too. Small things at first, just flashes in mirrors or dark corners of rooms. I'd feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up, the air grow thick, and there it was. A dark figure, just outside my sight, lurking in the shadows. It wasn't until one night, when I was home alone, that I knew for sure. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. I could feel it then, just behind me, in the doorway, breathing down my neck. I turned around, but the doorway was empty. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was just being paranoid. But then I saw it, just a flicker of movement in the reflection of the kitchen window. A shadow, tall and thin, its form shifting unnaturally, like it was bending reality around it. I froze. The air grew frigid, the temperature dropping so fast that I could see my breath in front of me. The lights flickered and went out. I fumbled to grab my phone, but it was dead. The darkness was absolute. And then I heard it. That dragging sound again, slow and deliberate, scraping across the floor. I ran. I didn't look back. I bolted out of the house, just like that night all those years ago, my heart pounding in my chest. But this time there was no escape. The thing was already in my head. I tried to call Emily and Jack, but neither of them answered. I knew why. They had seen it too. It was there with them wherever they went. The thing we unleashed never left. It followed us, haunted us, but now it wasn't just a thing in the shadows. It was part of us, part of our lives. I didn't understand it at first, but now I do. The house, the board, it was never just a game. It wasn't a simple ritual. We didn't just invite something into the house that night. We became part of it. I thought about going back to that house, trying to destroy the board, to close whatever door we had opened. But I knew better. The house wasn't just a place. It was a trap, and we were its prisoners now. The thing will never let us go. And neither will I. There comes a point when you realize you're no longer running, you're just surviving. The thing that haunted us, that followed us from that house, wasn't some fleeting nightmare or some forgotten terror. It was real, and it wasn't going anywhere. It had attached itself to us, burrowed itself deep inside our souls. It had been years, but the presence was as strong as ever. I could feel it creeping in the back of my mind, the shadows never quite leaving my sight. And I could see it in my friends too, Emily, Jack, and Sarah. We were all marked, cursed in a way we could never undo. I couldn't tell you how it happened, but there was a night, just a few months ago, when I realized we had no choice but to confront it. I had been awake for hours, lying in bed, unable to sleep. The nightmares had gotten worse lately, more vivid, more real. I could see the shadow clearly now, see its twisted form, its long, sinewy fingers reaching out toward me. Its eyes were nothing but empty voids, filled with the kind of darkness that consumed everything. It had been getting closer, inch by inch, every night. And that night, I saw something different. I could hear the familiar scraping sound again, but it wasn't just in my dreams anymore. I heard it in my own room, a low, unnerving drag across the floor, like something with claws was inching closer. I didn't have the courage to look, but I didn't need to. I knew it was there, waiting for me. But this time I had made up my mind. I couldn't run anymore. It had been following us for so long, hunting us in the shadows, but now it was time to end it. The thing wasn't just after our fear, it was after us. I called Emily, Jack, and Sarah. I didn't tell them everything, but I didn't have to. We all knew what had to happen. We met at the house, the cursed house, the place where it had all started. We stood in front of the crumbling building, our breath heavy in the cold night air. It had been abandoned for so long, but the evil that resided there had never left. It lingered, waiting. As we walked inside, the memories flooded back. The darkness, the cold, the terror. The floorboards creaked under our feet, and I could feel the weight of the air pressing in on me, suffocating me with the same thick, oppressive presence. I looked at my friends, each of us marked, each of us carrying the same burden. But this time we weren't afraid. This time we were determined. We found the room where the Ouija board had been. It was still there, in the same corner, dusty and worn. The candles were long gone, but the air still felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. I knew what we had to do. We had to confront it, face it head on. We lit a single candle. The light flickered weakly, but it was enough. Jack placed his hands on the board, and Emily and Sarah joined him, their faces set with grim determination. I stood back, watching them, knowing we had only one chance. "We're ending this," Jack said quietly. "We're saying goodbye. For good." The planchette moved, slowly at first, like it was testing us. But we held our ground, not moving, not letting it control us. We asked it the same question we had all those years ago. "Who are you?" The planchette moved again, dragging across the board, spelling out one word: finished. I don't know how we did it, but we felt it then. The weight that had pressed on us for so long began to lift, slowly, like a fog clearing from our minds. The air grew warmer, and the shadows that had always been there started to recede. The darkness, was gone. We had destroyed the board, sealed the curse, and ended the nightmare that had haunted us for so long. But as we left the house for the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. We'd survived, but we'd also learned something, that sometimes some doors should never be opened. Some games should never be played. I don't know if the shadow is truly gone. Maybe it's still out there, waiting for someone else to make the mistake we did. But one thing is certain, I'll never forget it. The thing that followed us, the thing we couldn't escape, has left its mark on me. And now, I can only hope that whatever was left behind will never find someone else. Because I know what happens when you play with things you don't understand. Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion. And I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.